Hello everybody and welcome to Cause and Effect, a show about vetes. Today we are going to talk about rock, paper, scissors, or in other words we're going to talk about how to analyze your meta and how to use that knowledge to your advantage. But first, as always, I would like to welcome my co-host Adam Esbjörnsson. Say hello.
Hello.
And Isak Esbjörnsson Bjärmark. Take a bow again.
You know what?
A bow. Only for the king.
Yes.
Not King Kong, just like an ordinary king.
Okay. So, how has your vetes week been, Isak?
Since the last episode, I haven't had anything to do with vetes, other than shuffling my deck that's at my desk. I usually have a deck at my desk that I can shuffle. And that's all I've done with vetes. So I have not.
You don't look at the cards; you just shuffle it. Yeah.
I draw some hands sometimes, get disappointed, and shuffle some more.
Okay. Basically, masturbate with cards.
I think that's inappropriate, Anders. Can we talk about me now?
So, back at you, Anders. Have your vetes week been?
No.
No.
But no, I haven't played any vetes. But on Wednesday, we are starting a new league in Stockholm, and I will be attending and trying to win it for the first time. That will be fun. But let's talk about Adam. I know you have some bragging to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went to Lincon gaming convention, and there was a vetes tournament there, and I won both the draft and the constructed tournament. Unfortunately, the constructed was a 9-player tournament, so I won't be getting a TVDA entry. But I played it's the same deck that Ida won with Gothenburg in, if anyone actually is interested at all. But, and just managed to bleed some. It was fine.
Cool. There will be some footage of the finals, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we recorded it, and as soon as we get it processed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on that subject, if you don't mind, Anders.
Yeah, go ahead.
Would be great to hear what you think about the recording finals and uploading them and such, because we've had a lot of viewers of our finals. I don't know, are you actually watching the thing, or just like skipping about and just see some plays? Because this stuff is in Swedish. We have more viewers of the finals we uploaded for a few weeks ago than we have in our ordinary episodes. So it's just a question for our audience.
Mm-hmm. So do you watch the entire thing, or do you just see what it is and then close it? Yeah.
I watched a couple of them, the entire thing, so I think it's kind of funny. But
you speak language.
I speak language and I know the players, so... Anywho, what did you play in the draft, Adam? What did you draft?
Actually, it was my second draft where I chose Appius Claudius Corvus and Melinda Galbraith as my 2-star vampires. They both have really good specials for ousting, especially Melinda, who can tap people. That's really strong in draft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, congratulations to your good fortune.
Thank you.
So, today
this is really fortune, though.
Yeah.
Well,
99% luck.
We're gonna talk about how much vetes is like rock, paper, scissors, and that's just luck, right? So, I think it's fortune. No, go ahead, Anders.
Yeah, so we're talking about analyzing meta today and how to use that knowledge to your advantage. How much would you say, Isak, did you try to anticipate meta and draw choices from what you play for it?
I always do a meta-analysis in my head, depending on the size of the tournament and like how engaged I am in the tournament itself. I make a more in-depth analysis or not. I usually end up lending a lot of decks to different players, like usually when my wife plays, she gets one deck I constructed, and then a few friends borrow some deck, and some other friend borrows a few cards, so I can like calculate which deck is probable that player will play. So I get like half the meta of an ordinary Gothenburg tournament in my head, and then I start from there and try to decide which deck. There are two things. For one, I want to play a deck that I'm into playing, and other part is I want to win. So I try to find common ground between these two, but like want to play and want to win. I never bring crap decks or unoptimized deck, but among the good decks, which one is I'm more into.
Adam, how much do you analyze your local meta when you choose decks for just non-tournament play?
It's a bit about what the motivation for me is in that tournament. If I want to improve as a player as much as I can, I try to analyze, because I think it's really helpful to try to analyze and make choices depending on your analysis, and then comparing the analysis to the reality, of course, to see when is your reasoning correct and when is your reasoning wrong. But the other part, of course, is which decks I would want to have a chance at entering into the TBDA. So in some cases I might choose a non-optimal deck just because I think it will be fun to have it in the TBDA. Okay. That's just a vain motivation. But if I want to be serious about the game, I try to analyze as much as I can with any given information. And borrowing decks or what your friends are into playing right now is normally information that's available to you.
Yeah. How about in casual gaming?
Yeah, that's a lot. It mostly comes down to which kind of new decks I create. If my meta is like really Auspex Sweeney heavy, I'm not gonna create a stealth bleed deck. So not that much in which choices of the decks I want to play. That's mostly random, just what I feel like. But which new decks I create is kind of meta dependent. I want to create a new deck that actually wins.
Okay. So how do one go about analyzing meta? I think it's like mostly it's come down to a gut choice for most people. And I kind of have a feeling this is what people are into, but you can actually try and make it a little bit more of a science to it. And we have constructed some categories and some graphics for helping to understand how to analyze that gut feeling choice. Adam, you can bring up the graphics, and Isak, you can maybe bring us in to what we are talking about when we see this rock, paper, scissors figuration that we have created.
Yeah, this is basically, at least for us, the way we think about decks. So there are these are if you think there are several tiers of categories and archetypes, these are the three big ones. And that's, we've given them each a symbol, rock, paper, scissors, because they have a rock, paper, scissors relationship to each other. So that's the reactive, passive category, which the most notable archetype in that category is an Auspex Sweeney, but also allies block, imbues as part of that category. Then we have minion control, which might be the most non-intuitive of these three categories, which is rush combat and mind rape, Baltimore Purge, banishment heavy decks. Essentially decks that can destroy, torporize, or in other ways deny other players their minions or actions of their minions or some such. And the third category is pool damage. So there you can have like a Weenie Boat, Kindred Spirits, Vignes, Dominate Power Bleeder.
I think most of us think about Vitus, we think about block, combat, vote, and bleed. Why didn't we use those four categories when we start to analyze our meta, Adam?
Because they don't have this rock, paper, scissors relationship that these three categories has. Like from a vote deck to another vote deck, they can be quite different. From a bleed deck to another, from a combat to another. It has some relevance in some other case of some other level of analysis, but at this level of analysis,
this really bird perspective that we're trying to get, like the most broad perspective. if you can say so.
Exactly.
So essentially, the basic idea is that each deck that you know will end up in the tournament, or each deck that you think will end up in the tournament, goes into one of these three categories.
Or your local casual meta as well.
Yeah,
This
if you
not
want to
only
apply
tournament play.
to the local casual meta, yeah, exactly. And whichever category is the highest, you check if that's paper, or if it's rock, or if it's scissors, and you want the one that beats it. So if you end up with a meta where you see there is a lot of rock decks, in this category it's reactive passive, then you want to end up with something papery, say minion control. That's the basic idea. And then you have to get into details after that first initial step. And this is a mental process I go through.
Okay, would you care to explain your mental process? What did you mean?
I make 3 lists in my head, one for each of these 3 categories, and try to assess what I'm going to face, and take my potential decks that I want to play or think is good to play, and try to fit them into the different columns and see which one I overall have the best possible best possible odds of winning.
Adam, you said earlier before the game that we're talking about victory conditions. Do you care to elaborate?
Yeah. So when you're playing either of these 3 categories of decks, you have different objectives that you play against. So the easiest one is probably the full damage one, since then your victory condition is create as much full damage as possible before you die, and you win simply by ousting people. That's the most intuitive possible way of playing Vitas, I think. But it's not uncommon for, say, the reactive passive deck, a block deck. Auspice Weenie, Allies, and Imbues are all decks that when they have built up, if they have lots of equipments, lots of allies, lots of minions, lots of blood, they have the build-up done, they're really, really hard to beat. Even for a deck that would normally be good against it. Say, minion control won't kill a tooled up Auspice Weenie. You won't rush them to death because they have 10 minions, or what have you. So their victory condition is to try to get this setup. And when they have the setup, they can start winning. And a minion control's victory condition is removing others' resources, making sure that other players has a bad setup as possible. Removing their minions most of the time, or removing lots of blood, or taking their equipment, or yeah.
Basically fucking up their investments, so they have to invest more and then die.
Yeah, and in case of minion steal, you can end up using their minions to your advantage, like having a mind rape heavy. Sorry, we should take this for later. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah. You can use their own minions for your purposes, anyways.
I think before we go on, we should also explain, because we have like some scrap princesses here or something. Like, what are the common features? We said we have imbued together with the Auspex Weenie, the both block decks. Okay, I have to think a little. I've written down here like common features imbued in Cryptic Mission. What were we talking about then, Adam? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's more or less why we put them together. And even though Imbued does not have that much reaction cards, and also Queen has a lot of reaction cards, it's still blockish kind of decks, which take advantage from other players trying to act against them, or I don't know, something like that.
And all 3 of these categories and have some sort of bounce as well. So that they are very difficult to get past. First off, you have to get through the intercept, and then after that, if you're bleeding, you have the bounce issue as well. Yeah. So they're very, very defensive decks. As we will see later, there are some defensive decks that makes a crossover into one of the other two categories as well. But these are the streamlined defensive decks.
And the features that will be common to other deck. The other categories are the minion controls normally uses. Well, they have D actions that target other minions, and the pool damage, of course, are commonly features no permanents, for instance, which is quite uncommon. You normally don't put cards into play. You use all the cards in your hand immediately.
Yep, exactly. So you gain not momentum, but you get an edge towards the other two categories because you don't have a setup phase or a very, very limited setup phase.
Yeah.
Like in a weakness, for example, you maybe only have one or two actions for Govern Superior, and that's it.
And even then, you don't need to play them as a build-up. You can use them as bleed if you want to. So they have... Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because my thinking is you watch this and you think, yeah, okay, a Potence Rush deck is really, really far away from, let's say, the Baltimore Purge deck. But we still have them in the same category. Why is that, Isaac?
Yeah, I think that is a bit of tradition burning in the Vitas community, actually. Because when you think of it, it's more of a... because the rule book says Potence Rush deck used the combat mechanic to win, and the Mind Rape use steal out of combat action phase part of the rule book. So I think that it's more of a label issue, like you have labels. So you think combat is combat and minion steal is minion steal. But in practice and with victory conditions, as Adam talked of, and their respective strengths and weaknesses against other types of decks, they have the same, in a lot of cases, the same strengths and weaknesses. And the goal is the same: to deny others minions, and by denying them minions, gain an advantage.
Yeah.
And
so that.
Yeah.
That is basically the idea why we put them in the same category, because he used the same tactics to win against a Potence Rush as a Baltimore Purge deck. Yeah.
There are of course some differences, but that's the same as there are some differences between a Potence Rush deck and an Animalism Rush deck and a Anson Guns deck.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Every deck has something that differs them from another deck because it's another deck.
But at this level of analysis, they're more or less the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have anything more to say about this stage of the analysis?
As a mental practice in getting to know Vitas, try to force every single deck you have put together right now into one of these categories. And if you really can't see what's the win condition, because as Adam said, these three have to do with win conditions, how you get to the win. If you can't see what your win condition are, you'll probably have a very unfocused deck. So I think this could be like a good challenge to see what sort of standard or quality one's deck is up for.
Yeah. So when you've gotten past this first very broad way of thinking about it, we can go down to our other graphic that we have used and put some time in. So Adam, what are we looking at now?
Yeah, we just made a diagram of these categories of decks, because obviously some decks don't fit that well into these three that we talked about. So here we're looking at a circle for each of them, and in the middle we have what we call a toolbox, which is some kind. It's more of an idea, but it's something that takes strengths and weaknesses from all three of these.
Yeah, if I may. So I'll just give an example that fits kind of well into the middle area is the Venture Grinder.
Yeah.
They have some aspects of all three of these categories, and depending on how you build the library and the crypts, they tend to lean more towards one of or 2 of the 3 circles, but it's a good example of what you can put in the middle.
And it's a good deck as well.
Yeah,
Even though
exactly.
it's in the middle. Which is weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Adam.
Alright. Oh, yeah, this is explaining the graphic. Should I take in the hybrids?
Yeah.
So there's some. I'm being tricked by Google Documents. Okay, here we go. So if you want to create a hybrid reactive passive minion control deck, our first example is a block combat deck, which is part of the deck is building up, having permanents, surviving, but also if you get into combat with someone, you'll try to torporize them. Say a Tzimitzi wall deck or something like that.
Later we're going to go into more how to use this knowledge to create new decks that fits into your meta to win. But just as a side note, maybe you can tell me, so when should you create a hybrid for a passive reactive deck with minion control to counter what? If you understand my question.
So a block combat deck, for instance, a hybrid between reactive passive and minion control. What would you want to face?
Yeah.
So this is a combination of rock and paper. So that's if you meet a meta by this logic that is scissor and rock heavy, because then you have 50%. This is very broad strokes now, the audience, just so you're aware. So you have 50% paper and you have 50% rock in your deck.
Which means
you want to face a meta with 50% rock, because your 50% paper beats that rock, and 50% scissors, because your rock beats those 50% of scissors.
Well, the paper rock scissor analogy, I think it's kind of confusing for me as well. But if we want to talk about the Tzimitzi combat deck, it's part one. It's good when you're being bled, because then you can bounce to your prey. But it's also
you say Tzimitzi block deck, because that's a reactive passive and a minion control deck.
Yeah. So they have that part of the reactive passive. It's not as good as an Auspex only deck, but it works fine if you get to bounce a bit. But it also beats the Auspex weenie deck, because you can block their actions to get their equipment, and you can put them in torpor.
And the Auspex weenie typically isn't that good with putting to torpor.
Yeah, exactly. So it's less focused, but it covers more potential enemies in what it's good against.
So this was when I talked abstractly about the rock paper scissor analogy. That is basically because you have a 50%, or if it's 50%, but you have a certain part of minion control, and that minion control beats the passive, reactive passive Auspex weenie type of deck, and then you get the advantage of being an Auspex weenie through being able to abuse the pool damage from the other decks that do pool damage. So let's follow that same logic. So go from abstract to this particular example. Another example where you can put this block combat deck is the more classic, say, Toreador 2nd edition celerity gun sticks that used to be popular in Sweden, not that much anymore. I don't know how it's out in the big world, but that's an example of another block combat deck.
So, you can continue to explain a little bit about our model, Adam.
Yeah, but of course this is not exhaustive in any way, because block combat is not the only way to combine reactive passive with minion control. Another example which could fit into this part of our circles is, say, a Spirit Marionette deck with lots of Auspex, Matthias with lots of reactions. It would be reactive passive, and it would be minion control. But in this deck, compared to a regular block combat deck, leans more towards the minion control and less towards the reactive passive, possibly. So this categorization where you call it block combat is actually not wholly accurate. But yeah, it's useful for us to explain what we mean with a hybrid of reactive, passive, and minion control.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. About the Salubri Spirit Marionette example is that a deck can be like 10% of one other category and 90% of the first category. So you're further towards the merging of circles or further away from the merging of circles. Like if you have a mental map of this in your head.
Yeah. Okay. So should we go on to explaining more?
We'll go clockwise, and we'll add the combination of minion control and pool damage. Most common example comes to mind would be the Bruce Bleed deck, which can include both bleed actions and rush actions, and try to, say for instance, rush your predator and bleed your prey.
Any other examples than just Bruce Bleeds, Isaac?
Yeah, the typical Mind Rape deck is a very good example, I think. Or typical, whatever Mind Rape heavy deck you do, because you have the bleed in Mind Rape, and you usually have some conditionings to back, and then you have superior Mind Rape to either remove your prey's blockers or to control your predator so you don't get ousted. So there's another.
I would also say a presence heavy deck with minion. What's it called when you
Mind Numb?
an action. Yeah, with Mind Numb. Kind of more of the pool damage side, but it's a little bit of minion control there.
Yeah, it's a good.
Yeah, and where you put that as an example, you factor in other parts because Mind Numb as a minion control card tends to be very restrictive in a meta where that's have a lot of high caps and maybe don't play as much crypt acceleration. It can yield a lot in terms of minion control, but in a mid-cap, low-cap meta, Mind Numb won't do that much. Probably won't end up being a minion control card at all. So that card is very conditional in terms of a minion control aspect of a hybrid.
Yeah. We can probably go on.
Okay. I will add the hybrid between a pull damage and a reactive passive deck. And this one doesn't have like a given name. It's not like common that we talk about this in the Vitus community. So I just wrote Bounce Bleed, and by that I mean like a pull damage heavy deck that just packs more bounce than regular. And I think that's something that people do quite often, and do it with an intention, because they realize there will be a lot of bleed on this in this tournament. They will take their regular decks and will change 5 cards for 5 more deflections or something like that. And then it kind of starts to go into the circle, the reactive passive circle, because it becomes a lot better when other players play the pool damage heavy decks.
Yeah.
But do you have any, you guys have any good examples of something else that's hybrid between these two? It's the only one I can think of.
For me, the two concrete examples that comes to mind is one, the Cryptic Mission decks, where you play a lot of bounce and wakes and have heart to compensate for eventual hand clog, where you have a lot of government conditioning and a few mirror walks. And probably the strongest deck you can put here is Girls deck, I'd say.
Yeah, exactly.
I would say like Kite and Atoll decks, or mid-cap Malkav decks, which blocks a little bit and bleeds and don't do much combat.
It's a good example.
But, yeah.
Girls will find in a piece. I think that was actually when that deck first started to get into the community and a lot of people started to see it and won a lot of tournaments. I think until that point there haven't hasn't been such an efficient combination of these two, reactive passive and pool damage.
Well, it's also reactive passive in a kind of unique way, because the build-up, like the victory condition, the build-up part of the victory condition that's relevant for the girls' deck is part of how they build their deck. When you had your second round of Ash Habits go off, you have created a better deck than is normally possible, and that's kind of a build-up victory condition with that deck.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, before we go on, I would like to ask the question. I think we've been sniffing on it a little bit before, but why create a hybrid, Isaac?
So if you end up with an analysis where the picture we had before with the 3 columns, and you see that 2 of the columns are dominant, and there are about equal amount of them, so basically every deck that you're going to face is either a minion control deck or a bleed deck. Then there's no obvious choice for that particular tournament. What is the strongest? So then you want, in my example I just presented, you had minion control and pool damage being the, if you have 50% of each of these, then you want to have both a lot of bounce, because of all the pool damage, high pool damage output, and you want to be able to withstand the minion control aspect, getting rushed and getting banishment thrown in your face or mindless or whatnot. So then there might be a point of trying to have cards in your deck so that you can handle both of these deck types when you sit down at the table. So there might be a point in trying to have counters to both categories. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I think you're.
I have something else.
We might have. Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
What's important to note is that when we're talking about these categories, it says nothing about the quality of the deck. Because we are restricted to which cards actually are in Vetus. And given the cards that is in Vetus right now, it might not be possible to create a what's called a focused reactive passive deck that has as high a quality that as a deck that by chance kind of goes like halfway between pool damage reactive passive or halfway between reactive passive minion control. So while we should be thinking about these categories, the 3 big circles, it doesn't just mean that we'll win automatically. We need the deck to be of high quality independent of which category it is.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different level of what you want to talk about. So it might the best deck in the world might be a block combat deck. From the high quality of it, independent of which categories. And then and this makes it more interesting to create this deck, because it is of higher quality than other options. So that's something that you might want to go on when you're creating your deck. Say, if I want to create a deck with Vampire X, I'm going to do what that Vampire has the possibilities to do. It doesn't matter that much which of these categories it is, but it will end up somewhere in this circle, or somewhere in this diagram. If that makes any sense.
Kind of.
Yeah. So yeah, you have basically what I can derive from this is that you have 2 approaches. Either you decide I want to do a combination of reactive passive and pool damage, and then you try to think something that would fit this a hybrid of these 2 categories, because that would be theoretically the best answer to a certain meta. Or you can just pick decks that you want to play and try to place them in this circle diagram or in the column, whichever you prefer, and try to fit every deck that you currently have put together or can play at a decent level, and try to see where they fit and try to find the best fit.
Yeah.
If you're talking more pragmatically, how to go about to use these abstract theoretical stuff.
And that brings me in what I was going to ask you guys actually. How do you actually use these models? Are we talking about thinking about the 15 most common decks that you face and then putting them in the model and then try to conclude what to play against in the meta? Adam?
It's more, for me, it's more of a case of which decks do I have available to me, and where do they end up in a position in this diagram.
But what I'm asking now is how do you go about analyzing a meta? Like, really conclusively.
It's kind of a hard... I'm not sure, I don't have a good answer for that. Maybe Isaac can help me. Do you have a good idea?
What I do is I try to stick to the column thing in my head.
So, go back.
So I use the column. I don't draw a map at my desk when I do this. This is just in my head. So these are the 6 decks I know of, and then I try to decide whether they're which one of these columns they're put in, and then I see I get an image for my inner eye. Which of these 3 categories have a overrepresentation? So which should be my counter?
Okay.
Or how can I modify this deck that I have in front of me to maybe better fit this particular meta, depending on how unfit the deck is, the deck is, etc. It's really if I were to be really scientific about it and write everything down, I probably end up with a stronger analysis. But I just talk to someone who's going to a tournament, and this guy is playing that deck, that guy is playing that deck, that guy is probably playing that deck, and just try to go through, discuss it, and then try to come up with a strong answer. You will never find a deck that will beat everything at a certain tournament, or should never say never, but basically you will not. But if you find a deck that is strong against 8 out of 10 decks, then it's great. That's a really good choice. Even just finding a deck that's strong against 50% of the decks available at a certain tournament is very, very strong.
Okay. Adam?
I think the categories thing that Isaac talked about is kind of how we should go about it when we analyze it, but I like the diagram of trying to put each deck that you know of somewhere in this diagram and try to see which of the 3 corners this tournament will be heavy in. Because
or your
as
local meta as well. I think it's important to it's your local meta as well. I think this could really more be useful in your local meta because people are more playing the same decks. Well, you can.
Yeah, because the local meta you'll have a whole picture.
Yeah,
you'll know
easier.
Every player's every single deck, and since most tournaments will be representative of the meta of the players that are playing them, most people will not create a new deck for a tournament. It's most of the time just using the knowledge of the local play group will be the same as the meta of the tournament.
Yeah, local tournament probably end up with the local players, maybe a few out-of-towners.
So what I'm getting at is, if you really want to try to beat your local meta, you could theoretically sit down, put every deck that you know people are playing, and try to put a bit bigger the decks that people tend to play more in this diagram, and then look at it and okay, so these percentage are playing these kinds of decks. I have the highest percentage of win rate if I play the reactive passive deck, if most people are playing pool damage decks. Yeah, that's how you really can use this model. Even if you don't have to write anything down, you can use it as a model in your head. I don't, or a brain map, a mind map. You can use something like that. I don't know what I'm saying, but this is like how you can really use this knowledge for your advantage.
Yeah, just assuming that the entire meta will be the same as the tournament meta.
Yeah.
And you choose a deck that is clockwise in this diagram, since that's how we've painted it up.
So you explain a little bit more concrete.
So say there's going to be lots of decks that say do pull damage, but then there's a few deck that goes hybrid, pull damage, reactive, and then there's a few deck that's reactive passive. If you follow my mouse, the decks will be spread like
we're
this.
talking about it could be a bleed deck, like a Vignes deck, and then a block deck like a Weenie Auspex. Then you should probably play a Animalist Rush deck.
Yeah, exactly, because that's clockwise in this diagram. It's the first thing if you drag this clockwise, you start to move towards minion control, and depending on where you stop, you want to go clockwise from that point, since you counter everything counterclockwise.
Yeah, and then you have toolbox in the middle, which is a whole different.
Yeah, then you're not taking any bets and you're not gaining any advantages. That's probably only useful if you go into a game or a tournament without any knowledge of anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that counterclockwise was really good. Really, what's it called? Pedagogist? What's it?
Illustrative, maybe.
Yeah. After the break, we are going to get a little bit more concrete of how to use this knowledge when you have managed to analyze your meta, and talk a little bit about how to build your decks, and generally trying to stay ahead of the curve in your meta. And we will see you after the break. So, goodbye.
Goodbye.